if you want, Rick, and you have more opportunity to take notes if you like.
No, I'm going to leave the note taking to Elizabeth, and you guys can tell me if if
Okay.
somebody has their hand up.
All right, sure.
But yeah, I mean, I don't mind if you want to, but if you got it, that works for me too.
All right. Well, got it here. All right. So who wants to do the honors?
I'm gonna let Paul do it. I think Paul should do it. Dan, what do you think?
Fine with me.
Okay. Okay, Peepaw will do it.
Okay.
Funny.
All right, so I noticed the recording has started. This is the first meeting of the Funding and Cost Sharing Working Group of the Public Safety Communications Task Force. Today is October 24th. It's 12:35. The meeting was warned for 12:30, so I will call the meeting to order. I don't have Barb's handy dandy checklist in front of me, but just a reminder that this meeting is being recorded. The recording will be available on the task force website shortly. And we'll take a roll call. I am present. Other members of the working group are co-chair Dan Batesy
I am present.
and Mayor Michael Dungis.
I am here as well.
Okay, we also have with us Dom Arcuri, Rick Burke, and I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank, Elizabeth Herring from Televate. And I see it
Yes.
appears we have one guest, Martha Morse, and I forget, Martha, you are from Hartford, is that correct?
Yep, that's correct, Hartford.
Oh, welcome.
Thank you.
So next on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Is there any changes required of the agenda from anybody?
Looks
Let's
good to
see.
me.
These aren't deferred because
Right.
we just don't have any previous
Right.
meeting
Okay.
notes.
If the agenda looks good to everybody, then yeah, the next item would normally be approval of the previous meeting's minutes, but this is the kickoff meeting, so there are no minutes to approve. Which brings us up to objectives, and I will turn us back over to Dom or Rick.
I'm
Nice
going to
one,
lead
Paul.
this today. All right. So as we've we've worked hard to get this group together, and I want to say we kind of saved the best for last. I mean, all these enhancements and improvements that we've been discussing really aren't going to be achievable without having a viable funding stream and some equity for the towns and agencies that are dispatched. So I'm happy we've got this group together. And thank you for making your time available. And as you'll see in the coming slides, I think we can get this done in 3, not more than 4 meetings. But let's go on to the next slide, Don, please. So regarding the schedule, I mean, the schedule for us on the funding and sharing here, 3-6. I've got us, being, working on this, for 3 to 4 weeks and presenting now that we're meeting weekly on the task force. Ideally we want to be done, before the week before Thanksgiving at the latest, I would think. Because once we get into that week, we're all going to go in different directions and so forth. So 3 sessions would be ideal to get us to the finish line. But we certainly, everyone's schedule is pretty intense. So I understand we'll have to work through it. But we'll get through as much as we can today, and I think we can begin teeing up for the next meeting, a real discussion on the options. But I want this to be open, obviously, and we'll go through the options. So let's go to the next
Rick,
slide, please.
I was just going to
Yeah.
add that I think we may also want to keep in our back pocket the notion that we may have to shift this work to the whole task force as we get
Yep.
towards the end,
Right.
I
as we
agree
just
with
sort
you.
of run out of slots for meetings.
Yeah, I don't disagree. That's a good point. Thank you. So I want to spend a little bit more time here because I think this is really Dom, is there any way you can make this just a little larger? Just get rid of, the slide just a little larger.
Absolutely, can
I don't
do.
think we need to go to presentation mode, but if you could make it, get rid of
Nothing
the
I
list.
can do either.
Not that, just a little smaller. That's good. All right, that works. All right. So, this is who we are. I mean, obviously, that's the three assigned task force members, and any other input we need, we'll gather that either outreach directly or whoever participates in these meetings. But the really goal for this is to develop preliminary priorities and recommendations in support of the statewide communication funding and cost sharing approach. However, I mean, that's pretty broad in general. And so I wanted to put in here what the Act 78 requirements are. Because we want to be sure that we meet those objectives as we go through this effort. So out of the Act on page 147, cost estimates for implementing the system in Vermont, including operational and capital cost. So we're going to go through those because the goal really is to say, what do we have and what do we need and what are those costs? We also, have options again, in the same section under J, options for sustainably and equitably structuring the financing of the public safety communication system, taking into consideration and these are these directly from the Act, existing budgets for regional and local dispatch. So we're going to discuss that. We have that data, and we don't have it for everywhere, as I'll get into a little later, but we have that data. The population, grand list, and call volume for each municipality. And we have the population and call volume. We don't necessarily have the grand list, but that's obtainable through the government. The state government has that. So the grand list is a list of real property and taxable personal property in the town and appraised valuation. So that may come into play. JI3, existing and potential state funding streams. We have obviously some funds that have come into this program, as well as other state funds that come through, particularly the Department of Public Safety and the E911 board. Available federal funding opportunities for public safety and emergency communication systems, including equipment, network infrastructure, and services. So there is a COPS grant that we have, but over the past decade, there's been a limited amount of federal funding that we would have been able to leverage in the past, and that pot of potential federal funding is shrinking regularly. So we'll discuss some of those options, but that's another point here. And then financing models adopted in other jurisdictions for public safety communication systems. Now, we don't necessarily have some of that direct information, but I think as an action item, we can go and gather some of that. We do have a number of examples that we could share with. So I want to hear back from the working group. Is that an action item that we should add to Televate's list so that we can begin gathering some of that information? Any thoughts? Mike, you're on mute.
Sorry, moving slow. I do think it's worth getting the grand list data. I think that's important. It's something makes it divisible by, right? And that's how most municipalities, well, it's how all municipalities calculate their tax rate. So having that data for the communities that we're serving, combining the total, might be a good way to go. Make sure we have that.
Okay. What about doing some researching on other models adopted. I mean, we have some of them. We could list them. We work in a number of states that and local communities
Sure.
and how they generate funding. I mean, we could provide, here's how others do it.
Yeah, I think we need to come up with some kind of a formula. I mean, I think using grand list by itself is not really appropriate. I mean, we went through this whole thing with education spending where we had identified gold towns and poor towns, and just because of the fact that a town has a ski resort in it, doesn't necessarily mean that it's a high user of public safety communications. And similarly, population doesn't tell the whole story, because you get some towns that have a daytime population of 20 or 30,000 because they have a lot of industry or business, but at night they're less than 1,000 people. So
Well, not that much.
So none of those metrics by themselves tell the whole story. There needs to be some kind of a formula.
Well, Paul, I'm glad you spoke up because, as the chair of the Regional Dispatch Working Group and your report delivered December 1, 2022, I mean, you've got a lot of background in here that we'll be able to leverage. And that, even the state was looking and has put together a framework for a model, and we're going to go discuss that later on as we go through that. But I'm happy that I don't disagree with you. We've got to have a robust approach. And then any other standards or procedures deemed as necessary or appropriate by the task force. So my next question really is, what are your expectations? I mean, based on our requirements, what do each of you think that we need to come out of this session with? It'd be important that we we could tailor our discussion around what your thoughts are and what our final objectives and deliverable are.
I don't know if this really answers your question directly, but I think it's important that we first off acknowledge that this is a state responsibility. I think Act 78 kind of says that. And if we're going to go around and tell these various communication centers, the currently existing ones, that if they don't meet these benchmarks that we've defined, that we're going to essentially put them out of business and tell them they can't dispatch, then and by we, I mean the state of Vermont, needs to take responsibility for those costs. And I think in order to make it equitable so that it isn't costing X amount in Chittenden County and a totally different amount in Essex County, that funding needs to come through the state. How we collect those funds for the state and to then turn around and divvy back out to the communication center, that's going to be the hard nut to crack. But I think we need to start by, if we're in agreement, acknowledging that is a state responsibility.
So I happen to agree with you, Paul. I think we are going to have to be careful about the language, though, right? Because what I've seen so far is we're not saying that. We're not saying we're taking the capabilities to dispatch anybody away. I think the addition of standards is future goal, as we think about that, and it may influence some of those decisions. And I also think we should be careful because unless we are really serious about saying you can't dispatch unless you do X, we may not want to pay for everybody 100% of the ride. I think we want to look at funding as a carrot, not a stick.
Right.
And that the way that this is going to be successful is we say, we have this money, and if you want it, here are the standards that you have to live up to. But if you don't want it and you want to do something entirely different, that may be within our purview to say, we don't care.
Right.
If a community says, look, I don't want to play with you guys, we're going to do it our own way, and we don't care what you say. I think we should at least have some notion of being able to say, okay, but don't come to us asking for money.
Right. Fully agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Fully agreed.
So I got a couple of follow-up questions I could. So when we talk about how when we'll get into how the centers are funded today, but they're they're funded based on their own, wherever the center is, PSAP or communication center, local jurisdiction money, and then towns are paying into, except for the two state PSAPs. As part of what you're saying is that money would be provided into a pool and then someone would manage the distribution of those funds, or we're saying that certain well, first to answer that question and I'll go into, are we thinking that is an approach?
Well, there's a third category there too. There are some towns that don't pay anything.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Right,
that's
Yeah.
going to be
right.
the
Those
other
that are
element
being
that we're going to have to
dispatched by,
navigate.
yeah, by the BSP PSAPs, for example.
Yeah. I don't, yeah. So we're gonna have to, address that item in terms of how to equalize, payments. But do you think that the funding should be in a central pool and distributed, or should those relationships that PSAPs have with their towns be maintained, that the funding is going direct to them, but there's a common formula for calculating, what towns, cities pay for dispatch services?
So if we're speaking, this is all under the program, Rick, like, so not the example that Dan was giving earlier where they might want to go out on their own. If it's all under the program, the ability to maintain consistency in technology and the ability to maintain consistency in policy and process, having the local towns fund that not to a pool, but directly has its, I don't mean to speak just to speak, it has its pluses and its minuses. If you look at the current challenge that our school systems are in today, all the money goes up to the state and then comes back to the communities based on calculations, as Paul was kind of mentioning, gold towns versus not. That leaves a gap. One of the things they're trying to undo is that gap in where other communities are paying for those costs. So we have to be very careful if we're going to look at that centralized funding mechanism mentality. It's not to say that that's wrong, just how the distribution works is going to be so critical if we take that path. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yep, to me it does. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll say that if I was king of the world, and I'm not, and I appreciate that there's definitely some limitations on what I'm about to say, but my sense is I don't know that we can come up with a model here where we can say we can pay for 100% of your dispatching capabilities, no matter what you want, no matter how you configure it, no matter, what you've always done. I wonder if it doesn't make more sense to say, we've got a few lanes that we're going to support 100% for every single place. Like the support of the CAD, the support of
Right.
some training. I've heard talk about dispatch academies, things like that. With the knowledge that a municipality is going to have to pay some of this on their own, that there's and again, especially as you go further out from the core functions, the core lanes that we intend to, so if you say I want to have 5 administrative assistants to answer the phones for my PD, okay, but we shouldn't be paying for that, for people to call for arrest records and things like that.
Mhm.
Like, to me, there's a core set that is universal. Everything else is sort of fluffing on the outside.
I like that approach too, because that's actually what they're trying to solve in the school system. So for example, if a municipality, they're saying $15,000 a student, right? And again, it's a good example because we just spent 30 years going through this from Act 60 to today, right? So, $15,000, what they're talking about is we're going to do $15,000 per student. And if the municipality wants to do supplement more than that, they supplement that out of their locality, right? So then what you would need to do, and this might go back to Rick, go back to the things like the regional planning commissions, maybe since we don't have regional government or whatever the entity is, saying, okay, let's call it Rutland 1, the Rutland 1 dispatch center wants to add these 5 things, people will have to vote or, say yes to it, be above and beyond that. Is that what you're saying, Dan? Like there's going to have to be a way to approve that and collect
Yeah,
that from a different stream.
well, I mean, I would also acknowledge that we're never going to have enough money to fund this entirely. And I think a pragmatic approach would be to say we're going to triage this and fund the most critical elements that we have. I think if you want to think in terms of like perfect world, yeah, then we'd have a governing board that would say, all right, you want to bring on 2 more assistants, you have to go before this to apply for a funding increase. Think of it like the Green Mountain Care Board and hospital spending kind of thing. I just don't see that being a very realistic option here, but I'm not opposed to thinking along those lines. I think I would recommend the more pragmatic approach is to say we're just going to figure out what the bare minimum is, and we're going to fund that as long as you meet our standards, and anything beyond that is going to be on the town or the organization to fund themselves.
And that's where the population numbers come in. So how do we decide what the bare minimum is for dispatch center based on how many they're serving? So there's like Paul said, I don't think you're wrong. I think you're hitting the nail. I just, like Paul said, it's going to be like an algorithm, like a formula that we're going to have to figure out how we calculate that bare minimum.
And I don't think it can entirely be either grand list or population, because when you start talking about the towns and gores and the Northeast Kingdom, these guys who have 35 calls a year, but you still need to be able to call 911 24 hours a day. So you're not paying per call, you're paying for the 24-hour availability of the service. And we've got to be able to paint that picture. So to that, there's got to be some universal construct that we create that says, look, here's what you get to do this, period. And then everything else we build out from there.
Yep. Any other thoughts? I mean, I want to be sure that we agree to what our objectives are, because this is a very broad and complex problem. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, and as I mentioned earlier, Paul has already, led a working group to develop things, and it hasn't been acted on. So, it's still dangling out there, and we're being, we're being requested to do, yeoman's work here. So I want to be sure that we don't make it too broad that we can't achieve a good our objective here, but that we do meet the requirements of the act.
Yeah. Would it make sense for us as an objective to come up with, this is the base rate of funding that would enable dispatch centers to do a bare minimum of service as we would deem to be appropriate? Is that the formula that we're looking for?
I don't know. I mean, Paul, what are your thoughts, Paul?
The short answer to Dan's question, I think, is yes. I think that I feel, I know Rick keeps saying that I led that working group, but we sort of came to the same conclusion as I'm feeling right now, is that I don't feel that I necessarily am qualified to say the money to sustain this animal that we're creating should come from this pot or that pot or that pot. For example, there's the USF fund, there's the apparently statute allows for the Agency of Transportation to assess right-of-way fees for utilities that run their cables within the highway right-of-way that is not currently being tapped into. There's various ways that the telecommunication companies are assessed different fees from their customers. But I don't know, I don't particularly feel qualified to say that we should be the recipient of those different pots of money. Ultimately, that's a legislative decision, but we need to give them some guidance on where that money, where we think that money can come from.
And I almost think that's putting the cart before the horse. I think we got to tell them what it is we want first.
Right.
And let them work out the fine details. And by them, I mean the legislature, but also a number of other stakeholders that may have an important voice in this. I would think it's more important to say, this is what we think is a reasonable allocation, and whether it's a percentage or, like, I'm trying to wrap my brain around what it is we would actually say here, but like, for a town to perform the dispatch capability, this is what a reasonable allocation would be, whether that's per population or grand list or calls, or I don't know, right? But
Right. And then it's kind of up to the finance committees in the legislature to decide where they want to take that money
Yeah.
from if they support it.
and we as a committee think that the following functions should be funded as a floor, a base, if you will.
Right.
And this is the minimum recommendation that we would think needs money, and let them figure out how to pay for it.
However, we know that when we present this to the legislature, their first question to us is going to be, well, how do you expect us to pay for this?
Yeah. Well, and I don't think it's unreasonable that we offer some suggestions along that
Right.
route. But I think, I think for the short amount of time we have, the most important thing we can do is say, this is what we think
Right.
we need to fund.
And this is how much we think it's going to cost.
Okay.
I appreciate this conversation because the way I've tried to outline this today's approach is to give all that background, cost and some, options for potential funding options so that we could begin considering it. In the next meeting, we could really, begin pounding the pavement on, yeah, I like this, I don't like that, or I need more information on that. This perspective. And so that's why I want to be sure that we identify any additional information that you're going to need to proceed during, as we go through this session. So I wanted to start here because this is the expectations, and some of it is achievable, and some of it may not be. So, but this is what we've been asked to do. So with that said, anyone have any more discussion on this, on the objectives of our working group? And I mean, we're going to go back and have these conversations multiple times, I'm sure, along the way.
Well, I'd like to try and make sure I understand. I hear what Dan's saying. He's suggesting that we identify what the cost would be to meet a certain minimum level of service. And I'm wondering, so how do we define that? Do we define that by looking at the recommendations from the other working groups, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3? This is what they recommend, and kind of put that together as a baseline of, minimum service baseline that we would want to see achieved for dispatching of, any town or municipality. Is that kind of what you're thinking, Dan?
Yeah. I'll tell you what I do when I put a budget together or when I go to the legislature. I like to think of myself as a contractor.
Right.
You can do whatever you want, right?
Mhm.
If you give me enough time and money, I'll give you whatever it is you have in your mind. So when I go, I like to kind of present a little a la carte menu to say, here are 3 levels that we can offer you. Level A is the Mercedes-Benz package, where every town would be fully funded to dispatch around the clock, 24 hours a day, with all the features that are recommended by our various working groups.
Right.
Level B is the Oldsmobile package. In the Oldsmobile package, we will give you most of the elements, but acknowledging that we can't give you everything. We're gonna do a bare minimum. And then level C, well, that's the Yugo package, where we've stripped it down to the absolute bare minimum, where the working groups say, if you don't have this, we shouldn't even be talking to you. And then say, this is how much each one of these packages will cost you, and you can choose whatever you like. That's what I would recommend. And by the way, and to follow that up, I think you're right. It does come from the recommendations of each of those work groups.
Right.
So, you pick the favorites of all. And again, level one, the Mercedes-Benz is we just pay for all of it. And then, triage it down from there.
Understood. Thanks.
And the contribution from the towns, they kind of, we're going to have to address the equalization for the cost of these services.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
and that's going to be another, I think that has to be
That's
another
part.
output of what we do here. Or
Yeah, that's
recommendation.
that's part of the where does it come from?
Yeah.
Right. I think we're kind of discussing two steps here. First, identify how much we need, or how much we suggest the legislature allocate, and then provide some recommendations as to where it comes from. And I guess the where it comes from has to address that equality issue.
Yeah. I think it can also reflect current practice too, where perhaps we take a hard look at what communities are paying now, and then determine, what's a reasonable estimate. And again, it could be a percentage, it could be, it doesn't necessarily have to be a hard number, but to say, when we looked across the state of Vermont, what we saw as a reasonable contribution for a community is X. And then we think that the state should pay X for the following universal core features. And then here's some other funding models that might be able to provide Y for some additional benefits and things like that. I know it's not that simple, but that's how my brain is sort of shuffling through this really complex topic.
Yeah.
Right, but I think that is one of the minimum things that we have to produce as a result of this task force is, what got us here was all of the hullabaloo in the State House about, Commissioner Sherling at the time was trying to get everybody paying something.
Yeah.
Because you have all these towns that pay nothing because they get the service for free from the state. And then you have all these other towns that contract with St. Albans or Hartford or Lamoille County or somebody. And so trying to reach that, get those towns that are paying nothing to paying something, regardless of whether they're paying it to the state or whether they're paying it to a dispatch center, and bring down the price tag on those other towns that are footing the bill.
I think we've heard Chris Bedotti also say that he'd like to have some of that revenue from the towns that aren't paying. So, I mean, the Department of Public Safety out of their budget is considerable amount of money that they contribute to support those non-paying towns. And for those, if I were in a town, I'd want that service too. No additional expense to me.
Right. Yeah. I mean, right. If I was paying for my own dispatch center, I'd look at these other towns and go, well, what the hell's going on here? How come you don't have to pay anything? I have to pay everything, that's, right. And that's regardless. I'm taking off my public safety hat for a moment when I say this and just say that it's a statement about equity, not about, money going to a particular dispatch center or a particular department.
Yep. All right, I don't know. I mean, as I mentioned, we're going to have this conversation throughout our sessions, but I really like to have the foundation we've created. I mean, I like that. Here's a simple approach, but we're going to begin building it so that by the time we're done, our sessions here, that we are comfortable that this is the best we can have to present to the task force. And as you said earlier, Dan, if we need to bring it all back to the task force, we'll be able to do that as well.
Yeah, and I also think that it goes along the lines of what I was talking about the other day of there's no silver bullet here. Even if we came up with a perfect, legislature doesn't have any money. So I think one of the best things that we can do is create this system where we put a vision into play and say, look, here's what we recommend. We understand that it's not necessarily going to be able to be done in a year, but here's the framework where we build it. And as we look at this over a 10-year process, we incrementally get better every year, or something along those lines.
I like that. All right. Anyone else? Let's go to the next slide if done.
Okay.
All right. So this is the process that I think that we should consider. Okay. So the way we design this presentation is this approach, and we can change it, but I wonder, an overview of the current public safety communication services and infrastructure and the associated costs to deliver and maintain them. So, I want to go over that so that we have a foundation on that. That data was collected through the survey, and we have it. And I want to go through that because it also illustrates the cost variance, and it's good to have it as background. I want to look at the communication system planning recommendations, funding, and cost sharing considerations. They've identified what their recommendations were, and I want to review those together. And the same is true of the options for evaluating them. So go through them, and then we can evaluate them as well. And maybe conduct research of comparative national and Vermont funding models that will have, which we talked about earlier. Certainly, we're going to get input from whoever participates in these sessions, or that you ask us to go out and to obtain their input from. For example, there was a meeting earlier in the year with a fiscal group, a legislative group that talked about their ideas on funding. So we'll go through some of that. We'll review the working group's cost estimates, as you've mentioned. We've teed them up, and there's, as you'll find out, we have some numbers from them, and others we still have to gather. And then certainly we're going to develop your working group priorities and recommendations as we go through. I mean, that'll be our conclusion. But we'll be capturing them along the way. And from my thinking on the working group meeting schedule expectations, we really can complete this in 3 to 4 meetings. I'm pretty confident. I think we can, ideally we may be able to compress it to 3. I think because of our compressed schedule, we'd ideally want to meet weekly. And you're assuming, I know how busy all your schedules are, but if we can get this done in no more than 4 meetings, that would still tee us up to present to the full task force middle of November. Earlier, if we can condense it to 3 meetings. And I don't know what your thoughts are about getting together weekly, but ideally that would be our best approach to be sure that we spend sufficient amount of time gathering, assessing the information, and developing the preliminary recommendations.
So real quick, Rick,
Yeah.
just on the last part,
Mhm.
the last full meeting, we set up recurring meetings and extended the time of the full task force meeting. I was
Right.
under the impression that part of that was to do some of this work in those meetings.
Right.
So is that accurate still?
We can. It's really up
Okay,
to
yeah,
it's up
all
to the 3 of you, as far as I'm
Great.
concerned.
I'm
Right.
okay with
Well,
that.
The work of,
But-
not just the work of this task force, but the work of other
Oh, okay.
working groups as well.
That's right.
So
Okay.
there is some leftover work from the tier 2 and 3 group, or from whatever other working groups.
Then there's the inorganic, organic, which Barb teed up for next week as well.
Okay, great. So
And
let's
that's
just,
mine.
yes. I don't mind scheduling an extra meeting every week of this one too. But if we have a conflict, maybe we can use that space in those cases. So,
All right. I'm a burden on you guys. And so, but this is the approach. Let's see what we got and where we're going to go from there. Thank you for joining us, Martha.
Yes, thank you, Martha. And if you have, I guess she's already gone. I was
If
gonna
she's
say, if you have
gone.
any other comments, feel free to send them, but
Yeah, we'll reach back out to her. All right, next slide, please, Tom.
Yes, sir.
All
Okay,
right.
action items, we don't have any yet.
Yeah, so no, I just want to let you know we're going to track them, and we will develop them, and as they come about. If you say I need to know this, we'll go and get it. And we need to know that, whatever it is, we'll track it, and then we'll have it done in time for the next meeting. So we've already been given a couple so far. So, but although you already participated, so you know our approach, and this, whatever additional input you need and wherever it's from, let's identify it so that we can identify it and assign an owner and get it done. So, okay. Next slide, please. All right, so I want to go through MCP's approach for identifying funding and cost sharing recommendations because, it's important that we, understand what they did and what they weren't able to get accomplished, and I think that the variance between what they were able to accomplish and what they weren't able to accomplish might impact what we're doing or might create an action item that we want to go get some additional information that was not collected. But I mean, the first thing they did was they identified key operational costs data, and they collected that from the PSAPs and the disparate centers during their interviews and surveys. So they gathered those costs. And 21 centers, PSAPs and communication centers, actually provided data. 16 centers did not report the data. So we didn't get complete data. And what they did was they leveraged the data from where they had it, and they extrapolated it to come up with projected costs for the others. So it's not a perfect approach, but it is reasonable, but it may not truly be accurate. And that's why we're going to see some variations. But, from the centers that we didn't collect the data from, and some of those are neighboring states, which we don't really need their data from. But for those that we didn't have data, do you think we need to go and ask those folks to provide us some data, or should we, can we move forward with what we have? We got a good sample, and if you're comfortable with what we have, fine. If not, we could reach out to see if we can get some other data. We're good with what we have or not?
I think given the time frame, we
yeah,
have to be good.
yeah.
Okay.
I
Agreed.
think if we had time, it might be worth making another run at some of them to see if they would share their budgets with us. But since we don't have time, I guess we should go with what we have.
We could, we could make an effort to reach out to them. But if we want to at least consider it, we'll put together a list of where we don't have them from, and we could ask them. But I'll leave it up. I don't disagree with it. Time is of essence, but there might be one or two. We put the list together. We'll say, yeah, we should ask them because
Put the list.
valuable.
I like that idea, Rick. Put the list together of who we
Okay.
don't have it from. We can say, okay, that's important to have, and then have you pound pavement to try to get it.
I'm sure
right.
some of
That's
them, I'm sure some of them intentionally did not give us the data. And I don't
Sure.
think it's not worth our time going after them. But if there are some that just plain didn't respond, it might be worth just making a call and saying, hey, you didn't respond to this survey. Would you have time to just send us your budget? But again,
we can also ask, we can follow up with MCP to see, if that was in fact the case. All right. So what data was collected? Cost of dispatch per center. So the labor wages, which are the driving factor. I mean, the highest cost to run the center are the wages, undoubtedly. Now, there are some operational costs. I mean, systems and some hardware, and of course in wages includes benefits, but so there are some operational costs, but they really are small. In reality, they're much smaller. And of course, in collecting that data, and we'll discuss in more detail below, there wasn't data collected for certain specific, the cost, facilities cost. What does it cost me, to run my center, power and facilities and maintenance and, cleaning and all that. So, an additional, they added some value, some additional cost to it, and I'll go through that shortly. But
I think,
one of the
Rick,
things,
the other consideration you got to think about too is that if we start talking about CAD that doesn't exist today, that would tomorrow, that cost also has to be factored in.
absolutely. That's also captured along with some, others, QI, QC, QI, and another couple of elements that have already been brought out also by the working group. But one of the key things that we don't have, excuse me, one of the things we don't have that we do not have in our budgets, the cost of public safety radio network capital and operational costs per agency. And one of our key limitations are the radio networks, but we do not have that data on a per agency or P dispatch or per dispatch center environment. And so those costs are not known, and we can do without them, but it's important to understand and to provide to the legislature that our costs do not include these. And obviously, you can't dispatch and you can't respond to incidents without radio. So we've taken on radio as obviously within the task force responsibility, but we do not have that data. I'm disappointed that we don't have that data, but Televate has done this work enough, and we do have some data from markets we've worked in, and obviously we've interacted with Corey, and we have some data from the state radio network, state police radio network, but it's important. I want you to be aware that we don't necessarily have that data, but we are going to be addressing that as a requirement. We also do not have no data on what is paid. So we have limited. We're just starting to get some responses, but we don't have data on what is paid for dispatch service on a per town or per agency, level. And we're attempting to collect that data now. We have a survey out that we went out through the league of Vermont League of Cities and Towns. Thanks to Mike, and that we are starting to get some responses for that. And we also have a list of representatives that are more responsible for that, and we're going to get an email out to them. But we don't have this data yet, so we don't necessarily know exactly what's paid for. But our goal, we're collecting that data. And that's important because we just don't, when we don't know what a town is paying, then we're kind of shooting in the dark. But we're doing our best to gather that information. It was identified as a gap a month or so ago, and we were chasing it down. So, additionally, the MCPs put together estimated costs to implement the communication system recommendations for governance, for CAD, RMS, dispatcher staff to meet minimum requirements, training and certification, regionalization related costs and savings and consolidation, and radio networks and devices. So they've given us their recommendation and their associated costs. Yes? Any comment? No? And then, then there's some, we have data on revenue and cost options, cost sharing options. So that is all that was provided. And we're going to go through that because it'll help establish the background. And I'm also identified here, the relevant sections in the communication system plan recommendations report. They're coming from section 3.6 funding and cost sharing, pages 123 to 135, and appendix A trends and insights, pages 146 to 155, from the report. So that's where our, most of the data we're going to be reviewing from them, it was derived from. Any comments, thoughts? All right, next slide, please. All right. So, when we look at funding, this is really, again, from there, I wanted to, go through this because it's some salient points here. Obviously funding is the key concern for centers nationwide. Without appropriate funding, centers are unable to provide upgrade technology, schedule staff, complete day-to-day operations efficiently. Funding can be identified from multiple sources, but without adequate funding, communication centers become stagnant and the efficiency of the provision of dispatch services suffers. Communication centers do the best they can, considering funding and resources. Grant funding, while not as plentiful in the years past, can be a viable source of funding, especially for technology projects such as regionalization, system implementation, or radio system replacement. Obviously, if you get a grant, there is a performance period. If you build it, you got to pay to maintain it. So whatever funding comes our way, we still got to have funding to operate it. That when the funding can also be a form of cost savings, and this is one of the points that MCP had tried to drive in with their recommendations to consolidate, and their final recommendations to eliminate all dispatch centers. So, there are savings realized, economies of scale, by shrinking down and still maintaining the level of service. Now, the task force doesn't necessarily agree with that model, but there is reality in that. Also, having the ability to buy off of common vehicles, procurement vehicles, is very efficient. And certainly that is something we do, the state does, and continue to do. And I highlighted this one down here. A key goal of Act 78 is fair and equitable funding of services, particularly related to incident dispatch. Some agencies do not pay for the service while others do. We've addressed that, and we know that we have to get to that. And identifying a funding method for public safety communication that, through the sharing of services, creates a secure, reliable, interoperable system. We know that that's our objective, and so I just wanted to go through those because they also, firm up the foundation of our effort. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to go through the costs now. So these are the costs that they've gathered, and I think it's important to see this. So here are the average costs of the PSAPs and dispatch center operations costs. Yes. All right. Based on the 20 to 21 average 911 call volume of 242,932 calls received by the 6 PSAPs, an annual average of 78,516, or 32%, 32.3 of those calls are transferred to dispatch centers. So, nearly 70% are received and dispatched directly by the PSAPs, and 32% are transferred to our centers. The average percentage of 911 calls transferred are as listed. They, obviously Williston and Westminster have the largest percentage, followed by Hartford, Lamoille, and St. Albans, and Shelburne. So this gives you an understanding of where the dispatch calls are emanating from. And VSP has got still has a lion's share of the dispatching too. And again, the towns that they're dispatching to are also not paying a fee for that service. Dispatch centers receive over 75% of their emergency calls via inbound transfers. And then the next item was the number of the reported 2023 incident volume was approximately 584,000 law enforcement, fire, and EMS incidents. And that's what the incident volume is. And that responds to equates to approximately one law enforcement, fire, or EMS incident per person in the state.
Rick, I got a quick question.
Of course.
So if we're transferring out of the PSAPs, if we're transferring 78,000 calls, 32%.
Yep.
What's happening with the remaining 70%? 68%.
They're being dispatched by, they're directly dispatched by the
directly
PSAP.
dispatched by the
They're
PSAP.
right. They're what we've been calling single stage dispatching, right?
Single stage. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something. Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it.
Yeah, these numbers are important because they give you paint a picture of what we've got, what we're working with. And clearly there are there are centers that do a lot of local dispatching, and the two VSP centers are lead the pack there, which raises their costs, and that cost is really coming directly out of the Department of Public Safety's budget, and those costs are in the many millions of dollars that are not directly affecting the towns. I mean, obviously they're based on state revenues, but it's interesting when you look at it from that perspective. So down to the total estimated costs across the state for dispatching services, somewhere between $29 million and $47 million. And that data was collected from that's based on, like I said earlier, the centers that provided a response and extrapolated to those that didn't. There's also in this numbers, there's a 25% contingency added to it and a 4.5% facilities operations cost. So in MCP's modeling, they added on an additional 29.5% to the costs that were reported. And I can go through an explanation of why, but that's really how their modeling works. And I can fully understand the 4.5 facilities and the 25% contingency. It covers a lot of things. So the total cost reported, not including contingency and facilities, was $20,810,384. And of that money, the PSAPs are $13.5 million, and the dispatch centers were $7.26 million. And of that amount, of the $20 million, all but $1 million and $1.3 million is for staffing. That's really where, as I said earlier, that's the crux of our expenses. Again, when they talk about regionalization, they talked about how we can compress, potentially reduce the number of staff. However, as you'll see as we get into it a little bit further, they also recommended that we are also short-staffed. So there's a bit of an interesting dilemma there.
Hey, Rick, one of the things that I'm sitting here thinking about is there's a certain degree of danger in talking about this in terms of the per call expense.
Yeah.
Because I certainly know that at least in EMS, I would hear from towns all the time that would seize upon that and say, Dan, we only had 30 EMS calls, but the dispatch center wants to charge us $9 million a year to perform this service. And while I do think there's some notion of, dispatching for the city of Burlington is different than dispatching for the town of Marshfield. I think we do want to make it clear, though, that what you're paying for is the availability, the service,
the readiness
24 hours a day, 7 days a week,
right,
not on a per call basis.
Right.
And I want to make sure that we're accounting for that somewhere as we talk about this.
Yeah, that's an important point. I think slicing and dicing the numbers as they did provides some, some informative
Yeah, me too. I'm
slash
not saying
important
throw it all away.
data.
I'm just saying I think we want to put an asterisk in there somewhere to say, but keep in mind
Right.
this
There
is
is a, right,
another element of it.
right. There's a
Well,
cost associated with just keeping the dispatch center ready to serve, whether they get a call or not.
Right.
Right, right.
And that's
Exactly.
really what this the last bullet goes through because, and I've color coded 911 call incident population because when you look at the cost based on, you know, those three elements, they differ. Although, calls and incidents are fairly similar. But, when you get down to population, the costs vary because, as you said, providing 24-hour service in a smaller community has, you need the same you need the same requirements. So if the higher population centers are going to be paying, the cost to deliver that call is lower than in those, densely, politely densely populated areas. And so you're right. These numbers can be tricky if not fully understood. Um, and when you look at the last item here, the highest cost per 911 call incident population, the highest costs were per 911 call is $90.37 on a call, $90.58 on the incident, and $176 was the highest for the population. So, looking at the data from that perspective is, could be considered for some alarming. Why is it costing that much? Well, it's exactly for what we just mentioned. But these centers here, if the towns that are being dispatched by centers that have the highest cost, then these centers, these towns could be paying are paying a much higher rate than those that are, where the average is. So when we look at the average at $87, the highest one is almost double that, actually double that. So, these are the towns that are paying, or the centers that have these higher costs. If we look at it, we look at it a little bit closer, or probably they may be charging their towns more money. I don't know the answer to that because we don't have that data, but I brought this to everybody's attention because this is not disparity in service. This could relate to disparity in the cost for paying the service. Any other thoughts? All right,
Yeah.
next slide.
I was just going to say that I think we want to be careful that we don't get too caught up in the weeds on this. That we can get into the you're paying too much, you're paying too little. I think our job should be a higher level to say we don't care what's happened in the past. This is what we think is equitable in the future. Because it'll never end.
Right.
All right.
And also we have incomplete data.
All right, so I agree. So here's the revenue sources. State PSAPs, certainly they're coming, sizable. The majority of their funds come from the Vermont Department of Public Safety budget allocation. There is an E911 board distribution from the Universal Service Fund, and there's the share that Westminster and Williston received. A total in 2024 was, allocated to all centers was $897,407. And I have to tell you that in many markets, many jurisdictions, the funds that are collected, they're not so we don't, in Vermont, you don't call them 911 fees, because if you call them 911 fees, there are restrictions on how those funds can be used based on FCC requirements. By calling them Universal Service Fund, the state has the luxury of using those funds for other purposes, and so that is, there's benefit and con to that, but But as you know, I'm going to give you data on how much was collected, but this is how it's set up. And so a limited amount of the funding that is received is actually provided to the PSAPs. And as we mentioned, no dispatch city town agency contributions. Regional PSAPs, again, the host jurisdiction budget allocation. And we've spoken to one jurisdiction that doesn't want to be a PSAP anymore. They can't afford it. So I don't know what they're going to do. They do pay for it, but they don't. They talked about maybe I don't want to be a PSAP going forward. They also receive an E911 board distribution of the Universal Service Fund, and their share was here, Hartford 95, Lamoille 110, St. Albans 117, Shelburne 92, and then they also receive. There's also an additional fund that the towns receive on the CT. So there's a dedicated CT refers to a distribution for dedicated 911 call handling service. And there's an additional fee out of the Universal Service Fund provided to Hartford, Lamoille, and St. Albans. It's not a lot of additional money. I mean, 804 for Lamoille, 124,000 to Hartford. And there are some reasons why that, but there's these regional PSAPs get, those three get some additional funding. Dispatch centers, on the other hand, their host jurisdiction contributes, and dispatch city town agencies contribution also have a contribution unless they're self dispatch, like we talked about for what was the one town we talked about?
Springfield.
Thank you. Yeah. So again, we don't have any insight into that calculation. We're trying to collect it, but these are the sources of their revenues right now. There are no direct state contributions, except obviously paid through the Department of Public Safety. And towns may get a distribution, and they may be using some of that from the state, but we don't. It's too deep to go through. Next slide, please. All right. So these are the line items, the budget line items that MCP has provided, and also that the working groups have assessed or have agreed to or not agreed to. So governance, policy, dispatcher training and certification, PSAP operations and management structure. And this is really staffing to support backup dispatcher and training, and there's analytics. We don't do QC/QI as a standard practice for dispatchers. It's done for call takers, but not for dispatchers. The CAD, of course, and a new statewide CAD, CLAD to CAD, and the alley delivery. And expanding the features of Valcor as the RMS, or to replace Valcor, but there is some funding for that. LMR communications, and as you'll see, this is the largest line item budget, and we'll go through those shortly. They also had communication staff. They put a budget in there for an additional 66 dispatchers. And I think we've agreed that on one of the working group sections is that's not we don't believe that's a requirement. If you can perform the minimum requirements with the staff you have, you don't have two on, that's not going to be an issue. They also have a budget line item for new and expanded facilities to support regionalization. So if we reduce a dispatch center and it expands another, that they would get an allocation to expand. That may or may not be a requirement either. Operations and technology migration. And then I put an MCP note in there that they say more precise costing information will be difficult to determine as part of raw costing due to multiple system variables. We get it, but we got to work with what we got, what we need. So that's what we've got. Any questions? Next slide, please. All right. So here is their line item cost. If you could just scroll up or make that just a little smaller so I could see that last box or get rid of the notes added one. Yeah, that'll help. Very good. All right. So we're gonna let's go quickly through this and then I'll go through the totals. So their estimated budget for a CAD RMS, 55 seats and mobile licensing, approximately 2,500. There, I took their mid-range of 8.6 million, and Dom and I did some independent. We got a budget from one of the vendors, a CAD vendor that's already been used in the state, and they gave us a budget over a 5-year period, a ROM budget that was closer to 8 million over 5 years for both CAD and RMS. So this is not a one-time purchase. This would be an allocation over a 5-year period. All right, so here's where the big bucks are, right here in the land and the fixed assets for land mobile radio. So if we, and again, their assumptions are that all the radios would have to be replaced. And I don't believe that's the case. I mean, we are looking at a conventional simulcast network. Now, some radios in a Project 25 that the state police are pursuing will, do require radios, but I think all that's been paid for. But this non-fixed assets, they had estimated at 37.6 million. And I think, Dom and I have gone through them with this. We believe this is very high, extremely high. And anyway, I don't know how much of this would have to be paid for out of a pool. Locals could pay for it. Maybe volunteer fire departments are going to have an issue with it. They've also gave us a radio network enhancement, and this is at 95% statewide coverage. And they estimated that the cost of equipment would be and towers would be $54 million for VHF, $268 million for UHF, and an 800 megahertz network would be $1.2 billion. So I know that's pocket change for Vermont, but we are like, Dom and I went through this with them multiple times. We're like, no. So we were requested by the working group 2 to put together another model, which we have. But so these numbers we're going to have a different set of numbers. But at 85% reliable coverage, so they didn't, they went down. The cost went from 54 to 26 for the VHF, UHF from 268 to 79, because we have a lot of existing resources already that cover. Then there was, some additional fixed costs of 18 million UHF and VHF. If we leverage all theirs and we reduce our coverage, we could minimize the investment. So those are the biggest line items. If you go over here now to salaries and benefits for governance, the estimated budget was between 3 and 700, 3 and 700,000 a year. Executive director, 4 staff members. What the working group came back with was we need 2 members, benefits, insurance, and so forth. So their budget we'll look at earlier. Offices administrative, varies, but their budget for for this was 50 to 170,000. Governance operations, for support meetings and legal and other, 15 to 75,000 annual. Program operations, this is kind of outreach and keeping people informed. They estimated pretty broad here because I think that we could do this on the cheap. So in the end, the last one, if you just scroll up, just look at the last, if we could just scroll up a little bit, Tom. Yeah. So the total investment for this ranged from 118 million to 119 million, and that was for VHF only at 95%. If you go to UHF or VHF plus UHF, the cost went to 4.3
430.
430 million to 530 million. So, again, pocket change, but this is where their cost estimates came in at. And the biggest here is land mobile radio. All right. We got 10 minutes left. We don't have any guests. I may want to just use it all, and I'll go quickly through what the working group said. And what do you think? Or do you want to can it now? It's up to you guys.
We need all the
I have
time
a
we can
hard
get.
stop at 2, just so you know, I can't go over. I got another meeting I gotta jump on.
All right. Let's go. Slide 16.
Okay.
Yep. Paul? You're good?
Yes, I'm good.
All right. All right. So this is tier 2. Or is this tier 2? I think it is. Yeah, tier 2. I typically go in order.
Yes,
2,
tier
3.
two.
All right.
Yep.
So again, CAD, as I said earlier, our what Dom and I found was about 6.5 million for CAD over a 5-year period. And again, RMS right now, this is similar to what we're already paying annually over a 5-year period for Valcor. This didn't change a lot from the vendor we got a ROM from. So the CAD is less expensive over 5 years than the RMS.
Right.
And so again, this $4.5 million is already coming out of the Department of Public Safety's budget. I'm not addressing, or I don't know how we address this, but the CAD, you got to have CAD in RMS. There's just no way around it. But we don't have a CAD, and we could get those costs for approximately $2 million over a 5-year period for all seats, and that would include a direct connection to the Valcor so that you could consume and post that RMS data as needed. The digital logging recorder, well, there's no really cost for this unless the governance committee deemed it, but the tier 2 didn't identify a cost here and punted it to, that's a decision for the governance board to decide. So I don't have a cost there. A core data transfer. So yes, it would be included as part of the CAD and rapid SOS licenses. And Barb was going to collect that, part of her thinking, and I think she shared it with the two of you, is that could come out of our existing pool and could be paid for of funding, and that if a sender chose not to accept the minimum requirements, then they would pay the ongoing licensing. GIS mapping, again, that's coming out of the would be part of the CAD, but it's also included as part of the E911. Over the top, that's local government decisions. I don't think there's any statewide requirements there. Again, a non-call processing. This is can a centralized can services provided for, say, warrant searches and others, could they be provided by a central organization? Obviously would probably fall back on the Department of Public Safety. That's again that was a decision that this group punted on. Cybersecurity, there's going to be a cost of cybersecurity. We don't have it. We could put an estimate there, but we don't have a cost for cybersecurity that either MCP provided. However, we do know that as part of the COPS grant that Corey had allocated, I think Dom was 50,000 per Westminster Williston out of the COPS grant.
Mhm.
And that would be a similar, probably a similar requirement for the other PSAPs. So we could, use that as a budgetary item. Um, VCOM, um, no, no need to keep it going. And of course, they come back with LMR infrastructure, a system of systems approach while considering existing mutual aid groups and common dispatch areas, while taking into account current systems and expansions. The cost is, the cost is in development. As we mentioned earlier, we don't agree with MCP's approach, but we are working on another model and can share that with you. We'll have that in the next 2 weeks at most. But this is what they recommended. Next slide.
Tier 3.
This tier 3. Now, tier 3 is interesting. We don't really have a lot of costs from them. So standard Q&A. There is, Elizabeth has done research on what this would cost. We could tee this up for you, what these estimated costs are. They said, governance can work on that, but we don't have any. We can give you cost budgets. Same thing is in these for support administrative roles. We didn't make a decision on this, and I don't think we need to, because we don't know if we will or not offer central support services to the centers and dispatch centers. GIS, that's going to be in the 891 budget. No need for that. Policies and procedures, while it's part of the governance subcommittee work, there's not a fund for it. So we could provide an estimated budget for that as well. Protocols, same, related to policies and procedures. No budget, but that's part of governance work, and the governance board, I'll show you, didn't go get something for that. Recruiting and hiring, I don't think there's a cost item here. Standard training, there is a cost item here. We don't have it, but we can put together what we think is a fair budget. And then staffing, this is the cost for providing additional staffing to support if an agency needs to send folks to trainers, and we do have a pool of backup dispatchers. We could put a budget together for that based on what your thoughts are. And let's just get to number 18. That'll finish it out for the cost. All right. So a number of you know this well because you're already on it and has been presented. So what the governance board's estimate, which is still a work in progress, they went through what it would cost to maintain, to develop and maintain a board, and their estimated budget for this more robust approach was $570,000 a year. And I know that we're looking at consolidating, potentially merging with the E91 board, which would reduce, I think, significantly reduce these costs. So, this is what we got from terms of cost, and we'll give a line items approach. And I think we can end here. And then, our next meeting, we'll just go over the funding options, and then we can begin, putting together our own thoughts based on these funding considerations. And I don't know, any questions here so far?
I think
My
we're
question
gonna
is,
lose-
I'm sorry, go
Go
ahead,
ahead,
Paul.
Mike. No, go ahead, Mike. Just gonna say, we're gonna lose Dan in 2 minutes, so.
Yeah, so
Go ahead,
just
Mike.
my quick question is there any way you can send this to us so we can just reread back through it? That's all.
Yeah,
Yes,
I will.
Thank you.
good idea. So
Uh,
before we lose everybody, when do we want to meet next?
It's today, Friday. I could do the same time next week if that works for everyone. I know Fridays are tough, but this isn't terrible.
Dan, are you still there?
He's
Yeah,
nodding.
I'm okay. I can do next week, same time if you want.
So that's at 12:30 on Halloween?
Wonderful. Yeah. And then we can go out trick or treating afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay,
All right. We'll follow up on our action items, and I'll forward out the presentation. And I appreciate you all for your participation. Thank you very much. I think I'm very confident we can do this in 3 meetings at the most.
All right.
So-
Well, thank you, Rick. Thank you for all of that. That was a lot of dense material there, but thank you for putting that all together. We have no members of the public and we have established our next meeting date. Is there any other business that anyone needs to bring up?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Have a
everybody.
good day. Have a great
I think
weekend.
out there.
Thanks,
Great.
Evan.
Take
That
care.
counts. See you. Bye.
See you, Mike.